Hello, this is Fear Files, and today we're going to talk about one of the most heartbreaking cases of child abuse in modern American history. This is a story that will make you think about what happens behind your neighbor's closed doors and about the price of silence. Get comfortable because what you're about to hear will stay with you forever. Gabriel's story. 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez was an ordinary boy with big brown eyes and a shy smile. He loved to draw, play with toys, and dreamed of becoming a doctor to help people. But fate decided otherwise. On May 22nd, 2013, Gabriel died in a Los Angeles hospital from injuries sustained as a result of systematic beatings and torture inflicted by his own mother and her boyfriend. When medics saw the boy's body, they couldn't believe their eyes. His body was covered with bruises, cigarette burns, and bite marks. His ribs were broken. His skull was shattered in several places. Gabriel was forced to eat cat feces, locked in a cabinet, tied up, beaten with a baseball bat and metal rod. He was starved, psychologically abused, called gay, and forced to wear women's clothing to school to humiliate him. But the most terrifying thing about this story isn't just the cruelty with which the child was treated. The most terrifying thing is that many people knew what was happening, saw signs of abuse, reported it to the appropriate authorities, but no one could save Gabriel. His death could have been prevented, and that's exactly why we need to talk about this case. How it all began. Gabriel was born on February 21st, 2005. The first years of his life, he spent not with his mother, Pearl Fernandez, but with his uncle and his partner. They cared for the boy, loved him, and Gabriel was happy. But in 2012, when Gabriel was 7 years old, Pearl decided to take her son back. No one knows exactly why she did this. According to some reports, it was related to receiving social benefits. Pearl moved with her boyfriend, Isoro Aguirre, into a small apartment in Palmdale, a suburb of Los Angeles. Pearl already had several children from different fathers, and Gabriel came to live in this chaotic, dysfunctional family. Isoro Aguirre had a criminal past and was known for his aggressiveness. From the very beginning, Gabriel became the object of special hatred from his mother and her boyfriend. Pearl believed that Gabriel was gay, and this enraged her. She and Isoro began subjecting the boy to increasingly cruel punishments. At first it was slaps and screams, then punches and belt strikes, then torture, escalation of horror. With each passing day, the situation got worse. Gabriel was forced to sleep in a small cabinet with his hands tied and his mouth gagged with a sock. He was beaten in the face with a bat, shot at with a BB gun. He was forced to eat spoiled food and excrement. His mother stood nearby and laughed, filming the abuse on video. Other children in the house were also subjected to violence, but Gabriel was the main target. Gabriel's brother and sister later told how they were forced to participate in beating the boy. If they refused, they were beaten too. The children lived in an atmosphere of constant fear, but Gabriel suffered most of all. Teachers at school began noticing changes in Gabriel's behavior. The previously cheerful and sociable boy became withdrawn and quiet. He came to school with bruises that he tried to hide. Once he came with a black eye. Another time with strangulation marks on his neck. His teeth were knocked out. He was constantly hungry and rummaged through trash cans looking for food. Cries for help that no one heard. This is where the story becomes truly heartbreaking. Because Gabriel tried to ask for help. Teachers saw the bruises. The school security guard noticed something was wrong with the boy. Neighbors heard screams and crying coming from the apartment at night. They saw Gabriel being dragged around the yard, tied up and beaten. The Department of Children and Family Services received at least 8 reports of Gabriel's abuse over a period of less than a year. 8 times. Social workers came to the home, conducted checks, talked to Pearl, and even to Gabriel himself. But each time they concluded there was no danger. Pearl was a master manipulator. She knew how to appear as a caring mother in front of social workers. She explained the bruises on her son's body by saying he was clumsy and constantly falling, or that he was fighting with other children. She said Gabriel was lying and making up stories to get attention. When social workers asked Gabriel himself, he often remained silent or confirmed his mother's words. This is typical for victims of domestic violence. Children are afraid to tell the truth, fearing even greater punishment. And when Gabriel did try to tell them he was being beaten and starved, his words weren't believed. The system failed at all levels. Social workers didn't conduct thorough checks, didn't interview children alone, didn't coordinate their actions with each other. Each new call was treated as a separate case, rather than as part of an ongoing pattern of abuse. The role of neighbors: silence and inaction. But let's talk about the neighbors because they were closest to what was happening. The neighbors heard. They saw. They knew something terrible was happening in that apartment. Arturo Martinez lived in the same complex and regularly heard screams coming from the Fernandez family's apartment. He heard adults yelling at the children, heard Gabriel's crying, heard the sounds of blows. Once he saw through the window how Isoro was beating Gabriel, but he did nothing. Other neighbors told similar stories. They heard screams in the middle of the night. They saw Gabriel sitting in the yard, tied up, gagged. Once a neighbor saw the boy being dragged out of the house in only his underwear, covered in bruises. She was shocked but didn't call the police. Why? Why did people who witnessed this nightmare not do more to save the child? Some said they were afraid of retaliation. Isoro was a large, aggressive man with a criminal past, and neighbors didn't want to conflict with him. In the area where the Fernandez family lived, there were problems with crime, and people learned not to interfere in other people's business. Others claimed they called the police or child protective services, but nothing happened. After several fruitless calls, they simply stopped trying. They developed a sense of helplessness. Why call if the system doesn't work anyway? Some neighbors relied on the principle of someone else will take care of it. They thought that since child protective services had been notified, professionals would handle the situation. They didn't understand how critically important each call, each testimony was. And some simply didn't want to interfere. In our society, there's a strong norm of non-interference in family matters. Many believe that parents have the right to raise their children as they see fit, even if those methods seem cruel. The phrase, "it's their child, it's their business," still sounds too often. The final days. In the final months of Gabriel's life, the abuse reached a peak of cruelty. The boy was so beaten that he couldn't walk normally. Teachers noted that he was limping, his face was swollen, he could barely speak. But he still came to school, and this was the only moment in his life when he was in relative safety. Then Pearl took Gabriel out of school, saying she was transferring him to another educational institution. In reality, she simply kept him at home, locked in a cabinet, so no one could see what condition he was in. In May 2013, the torture became even more brutal. Gabriel was tied up and left lying in his own excrement. He was beaten on the head with a bat. On May 22nd, Isoro struck Gabriel in the stomach with such force that it caused internal bleeding and brain swelling. Pearl called 911, claiming that Gabriel had fallen and hit his head. But when medics arrived, they immediately understood that the injuries were incompatible with an accident. The 8-year-old boy's body looked like a battlefield. He was taken to the hospital, but it was too late. Gabriel spent 2 days on life support, after which doctors declared brain death. On May 24th, 2013, Gabriel Fernandez was officially declared dead. Aftermath and trial. When the details of the case became public, a wave of outrage swept across America. People couldn't believe that this could happen in a civilized society, that a child could be killed for months while the child protection system failed to save him. Pearl Fernandez and Isoro Aguirre were arrested and charged with first-degree murder with special cruelty and torture. Prosecutors demanded the death penalty. At trial, horrifying evidence was presented. Photographs of Gabriel's mutilated body, medical reports, testimonies from the boy's brothers and sisters. In 2018, Isoro Aguirre was sentenced to death. Pearl Fernandez received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole after agreeing to a plea deal. But the story didn't end there. For the first time in California history, 4 social workers who handled Gabriel's case were criminally charged. They were accused of negligence and falsifying documents. They had falsified reports about checks, claiming they had spoken with Gabriel and other family members when they actually hadn't. The charges against the social workers sparked heated debate. Some believed they deserved punishment for criminal inaction that led to the child's death. Others argued the problem was with the system, not individual people. Social workers are overloaded with cases, underfunded, and don't have sufficient authority to protect children. Eventually, in 2020, the charges against the social workers were dropped by an appellate court, which ruled they had no legal duty to protect Gabriel from his parents. This decision sparked a new wave of anger and disappointment. Why neighbors remained silent? The psychology of inaction. Let's return to the question at the heart of this story. Why did the neighbors do nothing? Psychologists and sociologists identify several factors that explain this phenomenon. The first is the bystander effect, also known as Genovese syndrome. This is a psychological phenomenon where people are less likely to help a victim when other witnesses are present. Everyone thinks someone else will intervene, and as a result, no one does anything. The more people who see a problem, the less likely any of them will take action. The second factor is diffusion of responsibility. When many people know about a problem, each feels less personally responsible for solving it. Someone probably already called, it's not my duty. There are special services for such cases. All these thoughts reduce the sense of personal responsibility. The third is fear of consequences. Interfering in neighbors' affairs can lead to conflict, revenge, or simply unpleasant relationships. In Gabriel's case, this fear was justified. Isoro really was a dangerous person. But even when there's no direct threat, people often prefer not to create problems. The fourth factor is uncertainty in assessing the situation. Neighbors might doubt, is something really serious happening, or is it just strict parenting? Is what they see and hear enough to draw conclusions? Fear of being wrong and unfairly accusing parents makes people inactive even with obvious signs of violence. The fifth is distrust of the system. Many neighbors really did call protective services, but nothing changed. After several unsuccessful attempts to help, a feeling of helplessness and despair arises. Why try if the system doesn't work anyway? The sixth factor is cultural norms of non-interference. In our society, there's a strong taboo against interfering in other people's private lives, especially in matters of raising children. Many believe parents have a right to privacy, even if their parenting methods seem cruel. What changed after Gabriel's death? The Gabriel Fernandez case became a catalyst for reforms in California's child protection system. A law named after the boy was passed, which tightened requirements for investigating cases of child abuse and increased funding for protective services. A special commission was created to investigate the systemic failures that led to Gabriel's death. New protocols were implemented requiring more thorough checking of abuse reports, mandatory personal conversations with children without parents present, better coordination between different agencies. The number of social workers was increased to reduce the burden on each specialist. Additional training was introduced on identifying signs of violence and traumatic consequences for children. But the most important change occurred in public consciousness. Gabriel's story made millions of people think about their role in protecting children. Awareness campaigns urge people not to stand aside if they suspect child abuse. Netflix released the documentary series The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, which was watched by millions of viewers worldwide. This series sparked a global discussion about child protection, society's responsibility, and the need for reforms in social protection systems. The other children in the family. It's important to mention the other children who lived in Pearl Fernandez's home. They were also subjected to violence, although not to the same extent as Gabriel. Gabriel's brother and sister were forced to watch the torture and sometimes even participate in it under threat of punishment. After Pearl and Isoro's arrest, the children were taken from the home and placed in foster families. They were provided psychological help, but the trauma received during those years will stay with them for life. Gabriel's older brother testified in court, and his testimony was among the most heartbreaking moments of the trial. These children are surviving victims of the same system that failed Gabriel. Their stories remind us that behind every case of abuse are not just statistics, but real human lives forever changed by trauma. Signs of abuse, how to recognize. One of the main reasons we tell Gabriel's story is the hope that it will help save other children. Therefore, it's important to know the signs of child abuse. Physical signs include unexplained bruises, burns, fractures, or other injuries. Frequent injuries for which parents give implausible explanations. Obvious growth delay or insufficient weight. Poor hygiene, dirty, or torn clothing. Untreated medical problems. Behavioral signs in the child. Fear of adults or certain situations. Unwillingness to go home. Regressive behavior, such as thumb sucking or bedwetting. Excessive compliance or, conversely, aggression. Low self-esteem. Problems at school. Difficulty concentrating. Avoidance of certain activities, such as changing in the locker room. Signs in parents' behavior. Contradictory or implausible explanations of the child's injuries. Displaying little emotion about the child's problems. Using harsh discipline. Isolating the child from communication with others. Extremely negative statements about the child. If you notice several such signs simultaneously, especially if they repeat or intensify over time, this is serious cause for concern. What to do if you suspect abuse? The most important advice: trust your instincts. If something seems wrong to you, it probably is. It's better to call once too many and be wrong than to remain silent and allow violence to continue. Call Child Protective Services or a child abuse hotline. Every country has special numbers for such cases. You don't need absolute proof. Reasonable suspicions are enough. Specialists will conduct a check. Document what you see and hear. Write down dates, times, descriptions of incidents. If possible, take photographs, but without putting yourself in danger. These records can become important evidence. Don't try to confront the parents or independently investigate the situation. This can be dangerous for you and worsen the child's situation. Leave the investigation to professionals. If you work with children, teacher, doctor, coach, learn about your obligations. In many places, these professionals are mandatory reporters. They're legally obligated to report suspicions of abuse. If you called once and nothing changed, call again. And again, each call creates a documentary history that can ultimately lead to intervention. Don't give up. Systemic problems. Gabriel's story also reveals deep systemic problems in child protection. Child protective services worldwide suffer from chronic underfunding and overload. Social workers often have dozens of active cases simultaneously, making it impossible to give sufficient attention to each case. There's also a problem of coordination between different agencies. Police, schools, hospitals, child protective services, they may all have pieces of information about a problem family, but this information isn't always effectively exchanged. Cultural and language barriers also play a role. Families from immigrant communities or ethnic minorities may be less inclined to seek help or interact with authorities due to distrust or fear. There's constant tension between parental rights and child protection. The system must balance between intervening to protect a child and respecting family autonomy. Sometimes this balance is disrupted in favor of parental rights, even when a child is in danger. Gabriel's legacy. Gabriel Fernandez lived only 8 years, but his story continues to influence the lives of millions of people. His case became a symbol of the need for vigilance, compassion, and action from society. In Palmdale, where Gabriel lived, a memorial was erected in his honor. Every year on his birthday, people bring flowers, toys, and letters. His story is taught in social work schools as an example of what can go wrong and how to prevent it. Many people, inspired by Gabriel's story, became foster parents, volunteers in child protection organizations, or chose careers in social work. His tragedy turned into a catalyst for positive change. Gabriel's uncle, who cared for him in early childhood, founded the Gabriel Foundation, which works to raise awareness about child abuse and support reforms in the protection system. Other similar cases. Unfortunately, Gabriel's story is not unique. Every year, thousands of children die from abuse, and many of these deaths could have been prevented. Cases similar to Gabriel's have occurred with children around the world. Victoria Klimby in the United Kingdom, Peter Connolly, also known as Baby P, Ani Stefania in Ukraine. Each of these tragedies has common elements: systems that failed, adults who didn't intervene, and children who paid for it with their lives. And each should serve as a reminder that protecting children is the responsibility of all society. Psychological consequences for society. Gabriel's case had a profound psychological impact, not only on those directly involved, but on society as a whole. People who watched the documentary or read about the case reported feelings of anger, grief, guilt, and helplessness. Gabriel's teachers, neighbors, even people who simply worked in the same area, suffered for years from guilt for not being able to save him. Some underwent therapy, trying to cope with the trauma of indirect participation in this tragedy. The case also sparked a nationwide discussion about collective responsibility. It made people think, what would I have done in the place of these neighbors? Could I have acted differently? Changes in legislation. After Gabriel's case, many U.S. states revised their legislation in the area of child protection. Stricter requirements for checking abuse reports were introduced, mandatory video recording of conversations with children, tougher penalties for negligence by social workers. Some jurisdictions introduced a law according to which any adult who knows about child abuse and doesn't report it can be held accountable. This is a controversial measure, but it's aimed at making child protection everyone's responsibility. The role of media. The Netflix documentary series The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, released in 2020, brought the boy's story worldwide fame. 6 episodes detail Gabriel's life, the investigation, the trial, and the systemic problems that led to the tragedy. The series provoked mixed reactions. On one hand, it drew millions of people's attention to the problem of child abuse and inspired many to take action. On the other hand, some criticized the creators for exploiting the tragedy, for showing graphic images, and for causing additional pain to Gabriel's family. Gabriel's uncle publicly spoke out against the series, stating that the creators didn't get the family's permission and that viewing turned his nephew's tragedy into entertainment. He asked people not to watch the series, but instead direct their energy toward actually helping children in danger. This raises an important ethical question. Where is the line between raising awareness and exploitation? When does telling such stories serve the public good? And when does it turn into morbid curiosity? Despite the criticism, there's no denying that media coverage of Gabriel's case drew attention to the problem that otherwise wouldn't have existed. It forced politicians to pass laws, society to think, and ordinary people to become more vigilant. Voices of professionals. Social workers who worked with similar cases speak about the incredible emotional burden of their profession. They face the worst manifestations of human cruelty daily, work with limited resources, and often become scapegoats when something goes wrong. One social worker said, "When a case ends in tragedy, everyone points at us. But no one talks about the fact that we may have 40 active cases simultaneously, that we don't have the authority to forcibly remove a child from home without a court order, that the system is constantly underfunded." Police officers who investigated Gabriel's case also carry a heavy burden. Detective William Carranza, one of the first on the scene, later said that what he saw that day haunts him to this day. He had seen a lot in his career, but Gabriel's case was the most horrific. Gabriel's teachers also suffer from guilt. They saw the signs, they reported them, but feel they should have done more. One of the teachers said, "I think about Gabriel every day. I ask myself, what else could I have done? Why wasn't I more persistent?" These voices remind us that Gabriel's tragedy affected not only him, but many people whose lives intersected with his story. Signs that the system works against children. Analyzing Gabriel's case, experts identify several systemic problems that made the tragedy inevitable. First, bias toward preserving the family. The child protection system proceeds from the presumption that children develop best with their biological parents. This is a good idea in theory, but sometimes it leads to children being left in dangerous situations too long. Second, a high bar for removing children from the family. To take a child from home, social workers must have very strong evidence of danger. In Gabriel's case, the bar was so high that even obvious signs of violence didn't lead to action. Third, system overload. When a social worker has 50 active cases, it's physically impossible to give each case sufficient attention. Checks become superficial, important details are missed. Fourth, insufficient training. Social workers often don't receive adequate training in identifying manipulation by parents or working with traumatized children who are afraid to tell the truth. Fifth, lack of consequences for negligence. Before Gabriel's case, social workers were rarely held accountable for mistakes in their work. This created a culture of impunity and lack of accountability. The question of whether Gabriel could have been saved. The most painful question in this story. Could Gabriel have been saved? And the answer is unequivocal yes. There were many moments when the right intervention could have changed the outcome. If social workers had conducted more thorough checks at the first reports of violence, they could have seen the real situation. If teachers had the ability to report their concerns directly to higher authorities, bypassing overloaded social workers. If neighbors had shown more persistence and continued calling despite the lack of visible results. If police had taken reports of screams and violence in the apartment more seriously. If Gabriel's uncle had a legal opportunity to take the boy back where he learned about the abuse. There were so many if onlys, and each represents a missed opportunity to save a child's life. The other side, children who were saved. It's important to remember that not all stories end tragically. Every day, thousands of children are saved thanks to the vigilance of neighbors, teachers, doctors, and ordinary citizens who decided not to remain silent. After Gabriel's case, the number of calls to child protection hotlines increased significantly. People became more attentive to what was happening around them, and this led to many children being saved from abuse. There are stories about neighbors who, remembering Gabriel, decided to call when they heard suspicious sound from a neighboring apartment, and this led to a child being saved. There are stories about teachers who showed persistence and didn't back down until the child was helped. There are stories about doctors who recognized signs of abuse and ensured the child's safety. Each of these stories is proof that one life can be saved when people decide to act. And this is Gabriel's legacy. His death saved the lives of other children. What happens to children after they're saved? It's also important to understand what happens to children after they're removed from a dangerous situation. The foster care system is also imperfect and often overloaded. Children who have experienced abuse carry deep psychological trauma. They need specialized therapy, stability, love, and support. Unfortunately, not all foster families are ready or able to provide this. Many children go through several foster families, which creates additional trauma from constant moves and loss of attachments. Some end up in group homes where conditions may be far from ideal. The system needs not only to better identify abuse, but also to better care for children after they're saved. This requires more resources, more trained foster parents, more therapists specializing in childhood trauma. Cultural context of violence. It's also important to consider child abuse in a broader cultural context. In some cultures and communities, corporal punishment is considered a normal part of upbringing. The line between discipline and abuse can be blurred. This doesn't excuse cruelty, but helps understand why some people may not recognize abuse or not consider it necessary to intervene. Cultural transformation is required, changing social norms and values regarding child rearing. Research shows that countries that have legislatively banned any forms of corporal punishment of children see a significant decrease in the level of abuse. Sweden first introduced such a ban in 1979, and today more than 60 countries have followed its example. Education plays a key role. Parents need to be taught nonviolent discipline methods, anger management, understanding of child development. Many parents who abuse children have themselves experienced violence in childhood and don't know other ways of parenting. The role of poverty and stress. Although child abuse occurs in all socioeconomic strata of society, poverty is a significant risk factor. Families living in conditions of financial stress, social isolation, and instability are more prone to dysfunctional behavior patterns. Gabriel's family lived in poverty, dependent on social assistance, lived in an area with high crime rates. This doesn't justify what they did, but helps understand the broader context. Effective prevention of child abuse requires not only a response system, but also a system of supporting families before a crisis occurs. This means affordable housing, economic support, access to health care and psychological help, programs for parents. Impact on child protection legislation. Gabriel's case led to significant changes in legislation not only in California, but also in other states. The Gabriel Fernandez Act, passed in 2017, requires social workers to personally meet with the child and talk with them alone when investigating abuse reports. Laws were also passed requiring better training for social workers, reducing their workload, and improving coordination between different agencies. Some jurisdictions implemented tracking systems that allow viewing the entire history of a family's interaction with various services. Stricter punishments for child abuse were introduced, especially when it leads to serious injury or death. Some states also introduced mandatory minimum prison terms for certain types of child abuse. The psychology of abusers. To prevent child abuse, it's important to understand the psychology of people who commit it. Research shows several common characteristics. Many abusers themselves experienced violence in childhood. This doesn't mean everyone who experienced violence becomes an abuser, but there's an intergenerational cycle of violence that needs to be broken. Lack of anger management skills and impulsivity often play a role. Some parents lose control in moments of stress or frustration and harm children. Distorted perception of the child. When a parent sees the child as the source of all their problems or projects negative qualities onto them. Lack of empathy and inability to understand the child's perspective. In the case of Pearl and Isoro, many of these factors were present. Pearl herself experienced a difficult childhood and had unresolved psychological problems. Isoro was an impulsive and aggressive man with a criminal past. Their relationship was toxic, and they supported the worst sides of each other. What each of us can do. Gabriel's story isn't just a tragic story about the past. It's a call to action for each of us in the present. So what can we do? First, educate yourself. Learn the signs of child abuse. Understand how the child protection system works in your country or region. Know where to call if you suspect violence. Second, be attentive. Pay attention to children around you, in your home, neighborhood, school. If something seems wrong, don't ignore it. Third, act. If you suspect child abuse, call a hotline or child protective services. Don't think someone else will do it. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. It's better to be safe than to miss an opportunity to save a child. Fourth, support families around you. Sometimes parents just need help to not reach a breaking point. Offering help, a friendly word, practical support can prevent a crisis. Fifth, support reforms and funding for child protective services. Vote for politicians who prioritize child welfare. Support increased funding for social services. Sixth, consider becoming a foster parent or volunteer in an organization working with children. The system needs more people who are ready to directly help children. Seventh, talk about this problem. Silence around child abuse is part of the problem. Open conversations help reduce stigma, raise awareness, and mobilize public will for change. Memory of Gabriel. Gabriel Fernandez dreamed of becoming a doctor. He wanted to help people. He liked to draw and play with toys. He was a kind, loving child who deserved a chance to grow up, achieve his dreams, live a full and happy life. Instead, he experienced unimaginable horrors at the hands of people who were supposed to love and protect him. He died at age 8 after months of torture and suffering. But his story doesn't end with his death. Gabriel became a symbol of all children who suffer behind closed doors, a symbol of the need for change, a symbol that silence can kill. When we remember Gabriel, we're not just mourning a lost life. We're committing to action. We're committing to be a voice for those who cannot speak for themselves. We're committing to create a world where no child suffers as he did. Final thoughts. Gabriel Fernandez's story is painful and heavy. It makes us look at the darkest sides of human nature and acknowledge failures in our social systems. But it also carries an important message. Each of us has the power to change something. The neighbors couldn't save Gabriel not because they were bad people, but because they were ordinary people who faced a difficult situation and didn't know how to act correctly. They were afraid, doubted, relied on someone else solving the problem. We can all find ourselves in a similar situation. The question is, how will we act? Will we find the courage to act? Will we show enough persistence not to give up when the first attempt to help doesn't bring results? Gabriel's death was preventable, and if his tragedy teaches us anything, let it be a lesson about the value of action, about the importance of vigilance, about the necessity of protecting the most vulnerable among us. Every child deserves a safe childhood. Every child deserves love, care, and protection. And ensuring this is the responsibility not only of parents or the state, but of each of us. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, desire to help, don't let those feelings disappear. Use them as motivation for action. Become part of the solution. Because somewhere right now, there's another child, another Gabriel, who needs someone to notice, someone to care, someone to act. And that someone could be you. Thank you for staying with me through this difficult but important conversation. Remember Gabriel's story. Share it. And most importantly, act when you see a child in danger. This was Fear Files. Take care of each other. Protect children. And never underestimate the power of one person who decides not to remain silent.